Hello, and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and for the people who keep the country running. I'm Jonathan White, and you join us in a week where every cabinet minister is walking around Whitehall in fear at the supposed Valentine's Day massacre reshuffle. Even civil servants are unnerved with rumours of massive departmental reorganisations. Surely, though, this is just Westminster gossip, as likely to happen as, say, Sinn Féin polling first in an Irish general election. But while all this goes on, of course, the country and the economy keep ticking away. And to prove the point, we're joined here today by Mark Hughes, Managing Director and founder at Page Media Group. Mark, welcome.
Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today. And I thought it would be a good place to start, especially for the listeners, Mark, with a little bit of background. Of course, you founded the business now in the early 90s. Perhaps tell us a little bit about what the business does and what was the initial inspiration behind setting Page Group up?
Okay. Really started in the early 80s. I was one man in a drawing board when I first started out, around about 83, and then just grew that to a point where I was able to expand the business significantly over the years from around about 1990 to 2000. And we went from a small 5-man design company to a group of companies, 5 or 6 companies at the time, which employed around about 60 or 70 people, turning over around about 7 million. So it's fairly significant growth in a relatively short space of time. And I then went on to diversify into other industries. So at one point, I controlled companies turning over close to 15 million and employing over 300 people. Reasonably significant in the kind of SME sector, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. And what an incredible thing to be able to look back on with that in terms of that growth. And with all that in mind, Mark, what is it you'd say? And perhaps this is a bit of an unfair question, actually, but knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your old self, let's say the Mark Hughes of 20 years ago? What have you learned along the way that you think are some of the key things that you'd share with you if you could?
It's a really difficult question. I think the most important single factor in any of my businesses have been the people I've employed. And that's good and bad, by the way, because we all make mistakes. Everybody, Richard Branson had failed companies, so everybody along their way makes mistakes, and it's how you learn from those mistakes.
Yes.
And that also includes the people you employ, the people you get along the way to help you. I think one other significant factor in connection with that is that I've always tried not to treat people as employees. I try and treat them as part of the business and look for people who consider the business their own. One other really important factor for me has been finding people who are better at their job than I am.
Yes, and I think with those 3 points, Mark, there's something we could talk about for the next hour or so. But I know we're stuck for time here, so perhaps if I can briefly pick up on a couple of those points, and we'll start with the last one, and I'll relate that to, given we are talking in the midst of a cabinet reshuffle, the Prime Minister before this one, Mrs May, was very much criticised for some of her leadership style in that she seemed reluctant to promote people with their own big ideas and capabilities. Whereas what looks like is happening, we will have with the new Prime Minister, fresh off his general election victory, will be introducing people with their own ideas and their own strengths. And I think the reason why that's such an important point, Mark, as you've picked up on it, is because while it's true it's important to have a singular vision, it's also necessary and at times key to have players around you, and this is true whether it's politics, sport or business, with their own strengths and knowing where to deploy them.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think we have a very, very different leadership this time, and it would appear from the early days, who knows, that Boris is not afraid to have people around him who are stronger in their areas than he is, because you can't be a master of all trades, can you? You know, it's just not possible.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's really important. I mean, I'm pretty hopeful, and I think most people I speak to have a kind of a renewed confidence in moving forward, which we've been missing for 3.5 years.
I think that's also relates to that great point. Whether you voted Leave or Remain or 3.5 years ago, no one, I think, really cares anymore, other than having some certainty back in the economy and some investment back, whether that's from business or individuals.
Yes, that's exactly right. But the money goes round and round. I've always thought this is quite interesting, that whole investment topic. And most of the money that revolves around the economy finds its way back into the government in one way or another, doesn't it? So it's important to get that rolling. And we've gone through this period of stagnation and indecisiveness, which I think you just said, that has made life really difficult for everybody in business.
Without a doubt. Now, time really is catching up with us now. So I have had a note passed me, in fact, that says you're quite a fellow Chelsea fan. And so I think, given we are on the theme of leadership here, your thoughts, Mark?
on Chelsea, wow. Well, I think bringing in Frank Lampard is brilliant. It was probably a little early in his career, but the right time for the club because of what happened with the transfer ban, selling our best player, which was also the right thing to do in the right time. And I think at the beginning of the season, anybody would have been happy with a top 6 place. We've more than fulfilled the expectation, and so the expectation has now become more, and everybody wants us to finish top 4, which it's only going to be 4. It's not going to be top 3, that's for sure. If we can do it, I think it's going to be really difficult. But I think Frank Lampard's doing a fantastic job at the moment. Well,
between Liverpool in the Cup, Bayern Munich in the Champions League, and goodness knows who else in the actual league, it's going to be a tough month. We'll see what he's made of. Time really has caught up with us now, though, Mark. So I would like to, perhaps, if we can wrap things up, which we should get back to, Page Group, obviously. What are the plans for the next 12 months for the business?
Well, interesting question, because I'm in the process of retiring. I'm hoping to complete that process. It's going to be a management buyout, and I'm hoping that will be completed by June or July, and I'm just looking forward to moving on to other things. Really, I still take an interest in the business. There'll still be connections, and I think it could carry on and do really well. I hope so.
Well, I hope so, because it's true of anything, isn't it, Mark? Something you've worked so long and hard for and have a passion about. It'll be impossible, perhaps, to be able to walk away without thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I wouldn't want to. And I'm going to look to other areas and try and work with other people and help other people. And we'll see what happens. I'm certainly not the type to sit and do nothing. But I have many other interests apart from the business and Chelsea.
Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure discussing that and leadership with you today. Perhaps we can sit down in a couple of months and go through a couple of those things in a bit more detail, because there'll be lots to discuss in what will be quite an exciting year, hopefully.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure talking. That was Mark Hughes, Managing Director at Page Media Group. Coming up now, if you haven't heard it already, and still on the theme of leadership, is our interview with Sir Geoff Hurst. We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Jeff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't, I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing, I guess. There were one or two injuries. But the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And they quite always mention when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and a manager over many, many, many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life. And that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players. And of course, they become your friends. Who did you look at the time when to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved. What a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bobby Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Jeff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Jeff?
Well, the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era I was involved for 6 or 7 years, it was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at a time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in the group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless with that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprisingly they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in the game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, Jeff, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great, hard-nosed professional players and great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited to just have a glance round,
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you into. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening, and there was usual football questions. And then all of a sudden, I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him. So I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
And you've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitches, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more to just being good players in football. It is have a good player with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson is just absolutely. You've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, well, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
Good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody. And going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit, getting on with each other lasted for a long time. And I wouldn't. When you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else. They were all outstanding, and I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was. And I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course, but without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking, if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job, thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Very good nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Jonathan White. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, other guests, or any other person therein associated.